dress British, think Yiddish. If I had a magic wand to help fix philanthropy, it would be that you could not get a job in philanthropy unless you started as a grant seeker. If you wanted to replicate the 1948 campaign, which was the best campaign in history, today you would have to be raising well over $1 billion. I think we need loving critics, and I am a loving critic. Since 1975, 250,000 nonprofits have started in the United States. 11 have reached a scale of $50 million a year. And Birthright has been up to $180 million a year. It is a success not only in the Jewish world, but in the world in general. To Charles's credit, he basically said, let's keep going full speed and go out of business. It is clearly a missing piece of American Jewry. It's tragic because the challenges are unprecedented. I believe in noble failure. One of the mistakes that philanthropists make is they continue with programs too long. I accept that critique and I actually consider it a compliment.
Everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face.
No is just a stop on the way to yes. Art, it enhances life so much. I like to be surrounded with beauty.
My name is Gidi Greenstein, and this podcast is my platform for exploring the condition and direction of the Jewish people. Flexigidity is a word I coined by combining flexibility and rigidity to capture what I believe is the secret sauce of Jewish resilience, recurring prosperity, and permanent leadership in humanity. It is also the name of a book I published 11 years ago, with the title Flexigidity, the Secret of Jewish Adaptability and the Challenge and Opportunity Facing Israel. At the time, I observed that after decades of rising affluence and influence, the Jewish people might have passed its zenith and was entering a period of decline. Now, following the dramatic events of October 7 and Israel's war with Iran and its proxies, as well as the explosion of global anti-Semitism on the so-called October 8, it's time for a check-in. In this podcast, which I named Flexigidity, the podcast of the Hebrew man, I hope to orchestrate that discussion as someone who straddles both Israel and American Judaism. Professionally, I'm a societal entrepreneur and founder of the Reut Institute, one of Israel's most cutting-edge research, strategy, and leadership groups. I also founded Tikkun Olam Makers and spent years as a self-appointed peace diplomat. In addition, I'm a husband, father, and grandfather, and a committed long-distance runner. All of these aspects of my life will infuse this podcast. Birthright Israel would not have happened without the bold vision of Dr. Jeff Solomon. I can testify about that fact because I was in the room when it happened. True, other people as well were essential for Birthright to come into being. But it was Jeff's decisiveness as Charles Bronfman's confidence that carried the bolt of Birthright over the line. If we had to name the most prominent and consequential Jewish philanthropists of recent decades, Charles Bronfman would surely be on that list, particularly for his partnership with Michael Steinhardt in launching Birthright Israel. But Bronfman was not alone in his endeavors. Alongside him for 20 years was Jeff Solomon. They were a team who complemented each other in action and in thought, articulating the logic of their approach to philanthropy in books that became seminal for the field. Jewish philanthropy has a tremendous legacy. In one of the most dramatic moments of their journey through the desert from Egypt to the land of Israel, the Israelites commit an awful sin of building a golden calf. After that calamity, they repent by building the tabernacle, which is the first recorded crowd-funded project. Later, Moses introduces a detailed set of obligations to redistribute resources in Jewish society from the wealthy to the poor and in support of public projects, thereby creating a progressive form of taxation that embodies a quest for justice in a model society. When Jews went into exile in Babylon, they self-organized by building institutions, which were self-funded by the community. Henceforth, Jewish philanthropists have played a central role within our communities and in support of national causes. Donna Grazia is the most prominent example of this phenomena in the 16th century. The Rothschild family, Moses Montefiore, Julius Rosenwald, Jacob Schiff, and Henry Goldman are prominent examples of that societal phenomena from the 19th and early 20th century. Over the years, Jewish philanthropy became more sophisticated in its operation and deployment of funds. One of the most cutting-edge models is venture philanthropy, which refers to contributions that help societal entrepreneurs prove their concept and kick their initiative into orbit. Jeff is a pioneer of this vitally important space and is one of the most important people of Jewish philanthropy in recent decades. Today, I'm honored to have Jeff on the Flexigidity podcast. Jeff began his career by spending about a decade in the public sector, working in the areas of education and health. He then moved to senior roles at UJF Federation of New York, eventually rising to become its chief operating officer, overseeing strategic planning and budgeting. Those 20 years of service in the public sector and then in the establishment of the Jewish community were formative experiences when Jeff became president of the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Philanthropies in 1997. He held that position for nearly 20 years, where he helped launch and manage transformative initiatives such as Birthright Israel, Reboot, Moishe's House, and Slingshot. Following the planned sunset of the Bronfman Philanthropies in 2016, Jeff became a consultant, speaker, and writer. He co-authored with Charles Bronfman The Art of Giving, Where the Soul Meets a Business Plan, which is a guide to strategic philanthropy and social investment. He then co-authored with Charles Bronfman a second book titled The Art of Doing Good, Where Passion Meets Action, which explores philanthropic action and impact. Jeff is widely regarded as one of the thought leaders of modern Jewish philanthropy, and it is an honor to have him on the Flexigidity podcast. Jeff, welcome. Let's dive in.
It's great to be with you, as always.
So Jeff, I want to start, as I always start with the guests here, of taking us through a quick walk down memory lane. Where did you grow up and how did your family legacy basically shape you and set you on the course to where you are today?
So I grew up in the Washington Heights neighborhood of New York when it was known less for Dominican ball players and more for being Frankfurt by the Hudson. It was where many German refugees wound up. Both my parents came from Germany in the late 30s and went through public schools, had all of the usual New York experiences, which served me well, continue to serve me well. And the challenges of growing up as a child of refugees who came to this country with nothing.
So basically, I think it's very clear that the period that you led the Bronfman Foundation seems to be the highlight of your career. Is that true?
For sure.
Okay, so in what way was it the highlight? I mean, what were the things that you were able to do during that period that you could not have done before and you have not done afterwards?
You know, and I think the key element you've already stated, which is it was never a job. It was really Charles and his late wife, Andy, when she was alive, and I were aligned on our views of what had to happen in Jewish life. And for us, it was constantly a labor of love, a belief that we can get to a better future, a belief in things that bound us together. Despite obviously Charles grew up as an inheritor with great wealth. Um, I grew up with relative comfort, but essentially in a working class environment. And we were aligned because we loved our work together, and that was the key element.
So, as I mentioned already, and we'll dive into that perhaps later, we met in the context of Birthright. But can you just mention, and also Birthright happens quite early in your time at the Bronfman Foundations, right? You joined 1997. By 1999, you guys are making this big bet on Birthright. So it's kind of astonishing that that happened that early in your joint journey. But I do want to kind of ask you to look at to name the 2 or 3 or 4 major issues that you were looking at the beginning of your tenure at the Bronfman Foundation and you wanted to tackle, in your through that platform.
Charles had 2 major thoughts that were at the heart of his philanthropy. The first was Canadianism. Canada. If you asked a Canadian who he or she was, they would say, well, I'm not British, I'm not French, I'm not American. Well, what are you? Well, I'm not British, I'm not French, I'm not American. So one of the major investments that Charles was making was to try to help Canadian identity. And his second was the phrase he used was the unity of the Jewish people whose soul is in Jerusalem. And his real belief in Israel as a magnet for Jewish life throughout the world. And as we began to work together, we identified initiatives to deal with those 2 issues. And as you pointed out, our approach was not simply to fund people doing the same thing that they were always doing, although we did a fair amount of that, but to try to create entities that could be working on that. So today, the leading Canadian history and heritage organization is something called Historica, which we actually started and came out of our work on Canadian heritage. Birthright clearly has been an extraordinary success. Reboot, which focuses on how to connect North American Jews to their Judaism through culture, is another. Slingshot, which funds innovation, is another. We originally hosted the Natan Fund, which has been doing amazing work now for 20 plus years. Following September 11th, we created something called the Gift of New York, in which 60,000 relatives who lost somebody on a terrible day were able to take advantage of New York's cultural, sports, and entertainment resources.
That's really an incredible record. I do want to still kind of focus on your legacy. And so when I kind of learned about your history, I saw that you had 10 years in public service and then 10 years at Federation. So let's just focus on 10 years of public service. What were your major takeaways that you brought into your philanthropic leadership role from the time that you served in public service?
My public service actually began in Mississippi because as a child of survivors, I believed that doing something about the inequities in American society was important. And when I came back from Mississippi, where I worked, among other things, on welfare issues. I had the good fortune to become the Assistant Commissioner of Social Services in New York. That was a department with 27,000 staff and 1 million clients.
Wow.
And to be sitting at the top of that department gave me the most incredible education, far more education than any classroom could. And it was a highly politicized setting, and it really prepared me for what was yet to come. And then as I moved on from there and worked in rehabilitation and worked with the elderly, being in the service side of the field was enormously valuable, especially being a grant seeker. If I had a magic wand to help fix philanthropy, it would be that you could not get a job in philanthropy unless you started as a grant seeker, because there are too many arrogant grant makers who think they're doing the hard work when the hard work is really being done by the grant seekers.
I'm laughing. You know why I'm laughing?
Yes.
You're right. You're right in the sense that I think the nonprofit sector is in a condition of permanent scarcity. A handful of nonprofit, 99 per, a handful of nonprofit live in a state of abundance. The vast majority of us are always struggling for resources, always looking to make ends meet, always thinking about payroll. It's a very, very challenging field. Like, some people are asking me, should I go into the nonprofit sector? I say, think twice and then think twice again before you do that, especially if you are the entrepreneur and the leader of the organization. But let's now focus on the federation. So you had, let's say, 10 years of public service and maybe more, and then you're joining federation. And not only federation, UJF Federation of New York, which is maybe the most important community organization in history of the history of the Jewish people. A handful may be equivalent to that. And you are there right at the center, at the top. And what did you take from that experience?
Well, one of the challenges was that what got UJA Federation to that point was not going to work in the future. In other words, if you did a chart of revenues coming into UJA Federation starting in 1918 and going through to today, you would discover on an inflation-adjusted basis, it went up right through the Depression. It went up dramatically in 1948, and then it started to fail, and then it jumped in 67, and it jumped in 73, and it jumped in 82, and it jumped in 1990 because of the Soviet Aliyah. But it's flattened. If you wanted to replicate the 1948 campaign, which was the best campaign in history, today you would have to be raising well over $1 billion. And UJA Federation's doing very well, but it's $200 million, not $1 billion. And there are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is we don't think about ourselves as a tight community. In 1948, 1 out of 2 households gave to the campaign. Unions were organized around the campaign. Every industry was organized. And that's less so today. And UJA Federation continues to be the largest local charity in the world and continues to do incredible work. But as we became more American, we became the masters and mistresses of the universe. And rather than say, okay, we're going to give the money to a central pot, we want to follow that money. If we could, if we could put a chip into that check, we would put a chip in, and so we know exactly where the money went. And that's, in many ways, that's counterintuitive and challenging. But I came to UJA Federation in 1986, just when it completed the merger that created UJA and Federation. And what was so interesting, and this gets at the heart of the challenge, UJA was the part of the campaign that raised money for overseas needs, primarily in Israel. Federation raised the money locally. Every year, the Federation campaign started the day after Yom Kippur and ran for the fall. UJA campaign ran in the spring. They were separate, totally different campaigns. 1973, Yom Kippur War breaks out. Literally in 24 hours, the leadership of the two organizations agree, let's combine the campaigns. You can't do a campaign for local needs when Israel is under fire. It then took 13 years for the organizations to merge. They could merge the campaign in 24 hours, but the culture was totally different. The Federation campaign was more German Jews, more Westchester and Manhattan. The UJA campaign were more Eastern European Jews, more of Long Island. And everything about UJA pushed the money out quickly. Federation always held reserves. The culture was so different, and it was really the history of New York that was at work. And so when I came, it's after 13 years of negotiating a merger, there was the need to try to make this merger work. And it was a fascinating time. Literally, there were 3 governing bodies. You had different color voting cards. People today have no idea of what it was like at that moment in time.
So as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Precisely. Precisely.
Because, for some reason, when you ChatGPT or you Google Jeff Solomon, you come out as someone who's been critical of Federation. But I actually known you as being someone who totally appreciates the role of Federation. And that even came across in your, in what you just said. So why are you being thought of as critical of Federation?
I think we need loving critics, and I am a loving critic. In our personal giving, my wife and I are major donors to the 2 federations in the towns that we live in. I spend a good deal of time volunteering for federations across the country. I'm a big believer in the federation system, but I'm not a believer that it can stand still. And there's a wonderful expression: when memories exceed dreams, the end is near. The days of being the Jewish Bureau of Internal Revenue are long past, and that was the culture of Federation. It was how can I leverage the gift from you, because whether it's through guilt, whether it's through business contacts, and I think what is happening, and I give the leadership great credit, is there's a reinvention of the Federation movement, and we've certainly seen this since October 7th, to be much more relevant.
So I actually think, that the classic mission of Federation, which is to serve the well-being and the security of the community, this has been the mission of Va'ad HaKeila, of the Committee of the Community, 2,600 years ago. And I believe that's the core mission moving forward. And in my view, a lot of the problems are because there is mission creep.
That's
and
right.
these organizations start doing things that they shouldn't, and they're competing with other entities in the ecosystem. Because we all know that there's only one group of people in every Jewish community that wakes up in the morning with the mandate and the ability to think about the long-term well-being and security of the community, and that is Federation. Everybody else has a niche, has a lane, has an issue, has a topic, has a loyalty. Only Federation thinks collectively about the community. So to me, it's very simple. And if they stick with that, they have an evergreen. Nobody can compete with that, with any federation, when it sticks to that core mission. So I agree with you. A lot of it is reinvention, but some of it is so ancient and so old, and it's just natural.
And look, among the blessings that I have had is working on Operation Exodus and the Aliyah of Soviet Jewry and Operation Solomon and Ethiopian Jewry. And it was only, this is where Israel as a state and the American Jewish communities worked together hand in glove to pull both the political support that was necessary for those things to happen by legislation and actions of American presidents, and the work of Israel in absorption and only the federation system could respond at those incredible moments.
So I do. I mean, it's a separate conversation. I think it would be fascinating. Just zoom in on these 1990s, 1980s. This is, I think, the golden era of the Federation and American Jewry, because it was 100% aligned with American national interests against the Soviet Union and the Empire of Evil and all of that kind of enemy, and with Israel. So that triangle of American Jewry, U.S., and Israel was never more aligned than in that period of, the Let My People Go movement. It's really incredible. And I want to say that I've met a number of people like yourself who were the leadership of that period. And if you look at the characters, the leaders of that era, incredible human beings, Brian Lurie and obviously yourselves, and I'm now blanking on other names, but there was such a generation of giants of leaders.
No, Malcolm Hoenlein, Abe Foxman,
right, all of them. I'm just saying
they all, it was in many ways the right people at the right time.
Yes. So basically, I just want to move into the whole notion of venture philanthropy, which is really kind of introducing two universes, right? The issue of venture capital on one hand and the world of philanthropy. And Charles and you are really credited with elevating this notion and applying, not just crystallizing it, but also applying it. And probably by applying it, you learned more, and it was a process. But so what does it mean to think as a venture philanthropist in a kind of a values-based ecosystem? What are you looking for? And then I'd love to apply that to Birthright. I mean, what did you see in Birthright in 1997, 1999 that made it worth such an investment at such an early phase of your tenure there?
It was clear to me that Charles was passionate about people visiting Israel, and it manifested itself before I came to the foundation. He started something called the Israel Experience, which was to bring high school students to Israel. And he spent $19 million and didn't bring one additional high school student as a result. It was an utter failure. And that's the good news. It was a noble failure. I think one of the things we don't do in philanthropy and venture capital does a much better job is to fail quickly and learn from it. So over 5 years, $19 million was spent. And what did we learn? We learned that there's no point in working with high school students because you have to market to the student and you have to market to the parents. And the ones who are aligned and are prepared to spend time in Israel are the God Squad, the ones who need it the least. Um, Number two, we learned that the 8-week trips that were organized at that time didn't fit the lifestyle of teenagers. We learned that the more organizations who were involved at the time, the UJA, the Council of Jewish Federations, the youth groups, they were all, everyone had an economic incentive not to change the system. And those were the lessons that we took to what became Birthright when Michael Steinhardt and Charles had were at a relatively boring dinner at the Israel Museum, and the two of them walked out and sat on the wall at the museum and said, "What do you think about Yossi Beilein's idea about bringing every young Jew to Israel?" And although Yossi's idea was 17-year-olds, and it was going to be funded by taking away the money from the Jewish Agency, and none of those things came to pass. The raw idea of let's make Israel a gift from one generation to the next took for both of them. And in many ways, I like calling them the odd couple of philanthropy, because the tension between the two of them and the way they think and work allowed us to design something that was amazing. And one of the things that I don't take for granted is since 1975, 250,000 nonprofits have started in the United States. 11 have reached scale of $50 million a year. And Birthright has been up to $180 million a year. It is a success not only in the Jewish world, but in the world in general.
So we'll be back with Birthright. Can you just share a few insights about venture philanthropy? Like, take us into the crystallize for us that wisdom.
I think a key element is clarity as to mission, vision, and values, and building a team that fully gets it, that truly understands that, and manifests itself in that way, and the readiness to take risk. Most philanthropists really just want to be thanked at the end of the day. And when you do venture philanthropy, if you go back to read the articles about when Charles and Michael started Birthright, they were so critical. You can't educate people in 10 days. This is a joke. Why pay for rich kids from Hollywood to come to Israel? It's all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And the beauty of venture philanthropy is you're prepared to put yourself out there and take those risks, but you at the same time understand that you have to demonstrate impact. And today, that's not news in philanthropy. But 25 years ago, when we retained the Brandeis team to do the evaluation, and one of the core principles was that evaluation is part of the ongoing budget of Birthright, that was revolutionary.
I think you're touching on so many very interesting points. I'd like to kind of dive into each and every one of them. First is, the notion, like in Birthright, like you said, that it's a free trip. And I actually credit you maybe it was Charles, but I credit you because people thought that Birthright is giving a free trip, but actually we're asking a lot of the Birthright participants. We're asking them to give us 10 days of their time, unconditional on our terms on a Birthright trip, and not as much, who knows, I don't know about sex, but I can tell you that there's no drugs there and there's no alcohol there. And there's a lot of other things that are forbidden, and they have to be on time for the program. So we're asking a lot. So it's not really free. It's a different transaction, but it's not free from the perspective of the participant. The participant is surrendering to a program that is quite rigid. And I think you understood that, and there was a big debate among the philanthropists, and there was even a standstill around Birthright for a while around that issue. And I believe it was you who said, you guys do your program paid, and we're going to do ours for free, not free, but on these terms, on the Birthright terms. That's effectively how Birthright start. That was the tipping point.
I think that's another critical piece of venture philanthropy is once you've got your vision, you have to stick to it. The federations wanted people to pay something, and we basically said,
"You're not getting it.
You're not getting it. You start a program for people to pay, but that's not Birthright." We had a donor who offered us $5 million, but his condition was we would only take halakhic Jews. And we said, thank you, keep your $5 million. That's not the way we see it. And being clear, and I like to say that venture philanthropy is not a team sport. That it has to be, you have to be hard to be soft.
It's not only that. By the very definition of venture philanthropy, you're doing something else. You're doing something different. So you're not going to be consensus. It's not a kind of a consensus-based enterprise. Venture philanthropy is about your believing. Obviously, you're doing your homework. You're looking at the vision, mission, values, as you mentioned. There has to be a good team. There has to be a plan. There has to be a theory of impact. All these things need to be in place, but it's still venture. There's still risk involved. And some of these things won't succeed.
And, there's such a difference between the vision and the people who have visionary ideas and the execution. And you were part of the execution strategy of Birthright. And between you and the McKinsey team, and there was really top administrative people who thought through every detail. People for years did not understand that there was a 3-inch thick book of educational logistical standards that ran the program. They thought, people get on a bus and it's no big deal.
Yes, and basically, by the way, it's a good place to mention Lori Blitzer, who led the American side of the team and still a close friend of mine, and I know very close with you.
Mine as well, yes.
Yeah, so basically, yeah. So I just want to take you to the concept of sunsetting that you've also been kind of associated with. So the notion is that in order to do the next venture philanthropy, you have to be able to move on from your present investments. So just how do you think about sunsetting? When is a good time to begin to decrease your exposure and move on?
I think with living donors, it's a very personal decision. And the tragedy in American philanthropy is too often nobody asks that question. You make a lot of money, you sell your business, your financial advisors tell you you should start a foundation, and nobody asks you some of the critical questions, like, how long do you want the foundation to last? People forget perpetuity is a long time. What do we know from perpetuity? Foundations have been around 100, 120 years. That's not perpetuity. And why should it last forever?
Not only that, so many times you meet already like three generations, and the first generation is so frustrated with what the third generation is doing.
Exactly. And so, in Charles's case, he had a very healthy relationship with his children. And his children said to him, why don't you do your philanthropic thing? We have enough money because of generation skipping trusts and everything else. We'll do our philanthropic thing. We don't have to continue your thing. And that honesty, that brutal honesty, along with the tragedy of Seagram crashing and burning, that also was a factor. It left us with the decision: do we continue and give out less money, or do we continue to do what we were doing and give out the kind of money we were giving out each year and go out of business? And to Charles's credit, he basically said, let's keep going full speed and go out of business.
So, Jeff, I think that one of the key trends in the Jewish world is the rise in the power and influence of philanthropists. First of all, there's much more money in the Jewish world, which, by the way, goes back to your touch point of 1948. 1948, it would have been $1 billion campaign when there was much less money in our community.
That's right.
So if you do it inflation adjusted, it's $1 billion. But if you do it wealth adjusted, it's probably a few billions.
For sure.
Because our community is so much well off. But anyhow, the point is that philanthropists are rising in power and influence in the community, and especially philanthropists now are collaborating in sort of groups and they're coordinating priorities, which is why I believe that effectively through money, it's a group of philanthropists as opposed to lay leaders or professionals that are designing the future of our community. If you wish, Jewish statecraft is happening among philanthropists, not among any other group. So in this respect, what is the mechanism? You've been behind the scenes. What is the mechanisms in which these wealthy people get together and discuss the future of the community and envision it and then decide to make an investment and talk? I mean, how does it work in terms of the thinking about the long term of the community?
The best example, and it's unfortunately an example that's not been well replicated lately, was there was the launching of Operation Exodus in the early 90s. Started with something called the Breakfast of Champions. UJA, Brian Lurie, who you mentioned, called together a number of the major donors, and they had a breakfast for Operation Exodus and raised $54 million at that breakfast. And what Brian noticed was these mostly men did not know one another. Here were the major donors in the Jewish community, and they just did not know one another. And he encouraged Les Wexner and Charles Bronfman to organize this group into what was then called a study group. And it met twice a year for dinner, in which Shimon Peres would be a speaker, Mikhail Gorbachev would be a speaker. This group, which are the household names in Jewish philanthropy, could attract anybody. And then the next day, there would be a day spent on really talking about what the needs were, what the strategies were. And the first thing the group did was to say to Brian, thank you very much. We don't want anybody running this. We'll run it ourselves. And out of that group came a number of initiatives, not organized by the group per se, but the Renaissance of Hillel emerged from that group. About half of the group members participated in the Renaissance of Hillel. Half of the group members participated in the beginning of Birthright. Half of the group members participated in PJ Library. And the group itself had a lifespan of about 10 years. It ultimately didn't continue, in large part because it couldn't agree. 1/3 of the group wanted to do things together, 1/3 of the group wanted to do nothing together, and 1/3 of the group was in between. So there's it is sad that there are not more opportunities for the major philanthropists. Today, sadly, if I look at that group, Lester Crown is 100 years old, Charles is 94, Harold Grinspoon is 95, Danny Abraham is 100, and the majority of the group is no longer alive. So,
but I do think that there is a next generation, people like Paul Singer and Terry Castle.
Exactly.
And they are very coordinated. Michael Leffel. There's a bunch of mega philanthropists who are working together on major causes of the community. And a lot of them are now in Miami. I think Miami is the center of that. Center of gravity of that group is Kirsch family.
The Kirsch family, Dan Ock. There are many people in the group that is, if you will, 60 to 80, that represents the next generation of that kind of leadership.
And in 10 years, I think 10 years is a long run. If they were able to operate 10 years, it's a long run.
Absolutely.
So I just want to ask you about American Jewry in this respect, right? So comes Charles Bronfman. He's very passionate about Israel. Comes and you have all these philanthropists. They put hundreds of millions of dollars into Israel. They also are very passionate in dealing with anti-Semitism. But the question that I have as an Israeli living in America is, who's investing in the future of American Jewry? Meaning, and this is a question I ask often, in Israel, you have this group called the Fourth Quarter, looking at Israel's from year 76 to 100. You have a group called, the 100, meaning look Israel 100, Israel 2048. You have the government. You have all these entities looking at the state of Israel, imagining all the good that can be, investing talent, and making and turning some visions into reality. No equivalent to that exists in the United States with regard to American Jewry. And that's I find it very, very surprising because technically it should happen. This is a group of 6 million Jews. They have interests. They have needs of leadership, of education, of institutions, etc. So how do you explain this void in philanthropic vision and also investment regarding American Jewry?
No, you're highlighting something that I think is so ironic, because 25 years ago, there were 3 or 4 think tanks in American Jewry, and everybody was saying, why can't Israel start doing that kind of work and think about, Israelis are great in tactical planning at the moment, but why can't Israel do it? Today, there are, every other week, there's a new organization focused on being a think tank on Israeli life as it approaches 100 years. And there's nothing in the United States. The American Jewish University just started a think tank. We'll see whether it gets funded. It is clearly a missing piece of American Jewry, and it's tragic because the challenges, in many ways, post October 7th, are unprecedented. The relationship to Israel is more complicated than it's ever been, and there's not organizations here that are truly focused on it in a scientific, serious way.
Clearly, I think it's such a huge voyage and a big opportunity. I do want to ask you, it's something I ask all of my guests. I do kind of a regular ChatGPT question. And the question is, what is the biggest critique and the biggest praise of the guest? So I want to tell you what is the biggest praise. Here is what ChatGPT calls you. Ready?
Yes.
Architect of lasting impact.
Nice.
And here is what they say. Jeff Solomon, of course, helped design, launch, and exit from initiatives like Birthright Israel Reboot, My Jewish Learning, each of which reshaped Jewish identity, especially among younger generations. I think this is a tremendous compliment, tremendous praise. It should be on your wall behind you.
I was going to say, I think I'm grateful for buying stock in NVIDIA.
All right, here's the critique. It's about sunsetting. And it says that while you launched groundbreaking programs, your time-limited approach sometimes failed to ensure full institutional self-sufficiency before withdrawal.
I think that's fair. I think as I look at the number of successes versus the number of failures, the successes far outnumber those that failed. And as I said before, I believe in noble failure.
So there has to be a sink or swim moment.
Exactly. And I think one of the mistakes that philanthropists make is they continue with programs too long because their ego is so tied up in it that they're not looking to see what is the impact, and is this what you really planned? So I accept that critique, and I actually consider it a compliment.
All right, so just before we close, a number of quick questions. Now, let's say that your field is that you have worked with philanthropists. You're not the philanthropist yourself. The fortune came from Bronfman, but you help manage, deploy his funds, and you're really, I think, the legendary embodiment of the legendary figure of that generation in this line of work, my personal view. But to you, who is the most remarkable person, non-living person in your field? The person that you look at and you say, oh my God, he was my model.
The former head of JDC, Goldman, was a genius. Ralph Goldman was a hero of mine. I think he literally carried Ben-Gurion's briefcase for many years and built JDC and built Israeli institutions using an American charity as the base, and did it with decency. So Ralph Goldman is the person.
I just want to say about him, it's so interesting you mentioned him, and you're my witness that this was not coordinated at all. So one day I go to the JDC headquarters and I see this elderly guy and he's working there, and someone's telling me, hey, this is Ralph Goldman. So it turns out that he was working at JDC to his 90s.
Yes.
And that's so interesting and remarkable. So he's the most inspiring, living, operating, still active person in your field.
My friend and colleague Barry Feinstone, who heads up the Jim Joseph Foundation. He has been a profile in courage and has really provided leadership during COVID, post October 7th. He understands the role of philanthropy in brilliant ways.
Fantastic. If you had $1 million to donate, who would you give it to?
So one of the things that I've been working on for the past 2 years is the creation of a Jewish climate trust. And I believe that one of the things that it can do is to help bring young Jews back to Judaism, and to show Israel as a light unto the nations. And I love the work that they're doing, and that's what I would be doing with $1 million today.
Fantastic. What books are you reading now? But I have to say to the audience here that Jeff is an extremely well-read person, and when you come to your home, there's books everywhere, which I love, and great books.
So I'm reading 2 books that I'm enjoying very much, very different. One is the new Sam Tennenthouse biography of William Buckley. I although I wouldn't put myself down as a conservative thinker, I think Buckley has changed American conservative thinking, and this is a fascinating biography. And at the same time, a friend of mine from Israel sent me a copy of Altneuland, the brilliant book that foretells what Israel is, and I'm about 100 pages into it.
Who's the author? Is it
It's
Herzl's book?
Herzl.
Or?
It's Herzl's book.
Oh my God, yes, of course. So it's actually very interesting, that book, because it describes a potential role for the Jewish state to play in the Middle East. And maybe after the war that we're in, the opportunity for that will emerge. And Israel is already doing a lot for water security and energy security and agricultural, but there is so much more that could be done. If this war ends with Iran and of course with the Palestinians. What podcasts are you listening to?
I'm not a big podcast listener. I listen to the Hartman podcasts occasionally, but I tend to read more than listen.
Hopefully you listen to this one.
Yes.
So Jeff, just 2 questions really unique to you. Whenever I came to your office, when I come to your home, there's always art around. How do you choose your art? Is art even connected to your professional life, to your passion? I mean, it's so beautiful and gorgeous, but what is it?
It is, I think art, whether it's visual art, sculpture, music, dance, it enhances life so much, and I just make, I'm not embarrassed to say that I like to be surrounded with beauty, that it enriches my life, and I'm very fortunate. One of the nice things in working with Charles is he has a wonderful art collection that's every office is filled with wonderful, whimsical art.
But how do you choose?
It's
always very colorful. It's always so rich.
It's a combination of studying what I like and what I can afford, and trying to find the balance between the two.
All right. My next question is about fashion. I think it's fair to say you're like the best dressed Jewish professional and that I've ever seen consistently. So how do you think about the way you dress? You're always impeccably, the suits, the handkerchiefs. It's so elegant.
I once heard a summary of a Harvard MBA, which is dress British, think Yiddish. And
That, I think, is the title of this conversation.
Right. And I've taken it to heart. One of the things that I have on my wall behind me is when I stepped down from the board of the Council on Foundations, they made up a dummy GQ cover, which has a picture of me, said "Best Dressed Man in Philanthropy," and articles like "Don't let anybody else pick your tie."
This is great. All right, Jeff, listen, it's such a pleasure always to talk to you. I always learn from you. I see it as a privilege that I have the access to your wisdom every once in a while. And it was a pleasure to have you. And if you want to say final words, it's yours.
No, my final word is it's just always a pleasure to be with you, to see your brain and how it works and what you do for the Jewish people and for Israel, and it's nonstop, and it, my frustration is that you have to spend as much time as you do chasing resources instead of chasing mission.
By the way, I have to say, sorry for digressing again, that because yes, it's very, very draining to think about resources and raise money and make ends meet. That's all true. At the same time, the philanthropists that you meet and the professionals that you meet, people like yourself, are so thoughtful, and they're so they have so much information, and the process of discussing your ideas with them actually is, I would say, is far more consequential for the crystallization of the vision than the inside work is done by the team. Because, I think it was Muhammad Ali that said, everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face.
Right.
So basically it's the same, like you design this project, beautiful, with your team on the whiteboard, you write it, but then you hit the philanthropists and they are challenging you. And that's more crystallizing than anything you can do in the office. And I really appreciate that process, and I've always learned a lot. And in many cases, things that I did, I can trace the most elegant element of the project to an insight of a donor or a supporter, and sometimes even people that said no. I think that an educated no is the second best answer. And sometimes an educated no is more important than a yes that is sort of a superficial send-off yes.
And,
so,
I'm a big believer that no is just a stop on the way to yes.
Yes. Anyhow, Jeff, thank you very much.
My
Such
pleasure.
a pleasure.
Good to be with you.
Same here. Friends, if you made it to this point, you just had the pleasure of listening to one of the most prominent thought leaders on current Jewish philanthropy in the United States. I hope that Jeff's legacy in the area of venture philanthropy will inspire many Jewish donors and leaders, because the challenges of the coming decades will require many bold solutions. Thank you for listening.